Welcome to this series exploring innovation, progress, and achievement using a technocentric paradigm by Ash Stewart. Episode 7, The Information Age, when software began eating the world. From the might of the muscle to the metal of the mind. In the previous episode, we looked at the birth of industry, large-scale mechanized production, as part of the story of the Industrial Revolution that began in Britain in the late 1700s. Towards the latter part of the Industrial Revolution, some erudite and expansive mind, surveying and chronicling the breadth and scale of change and progress this movement had wrought, could be forgiven for proclaiming pompously that all technological progress, as might be conceived by the wit of man, has already so been definitively implemented by his ken. We are the peak of civilization. But of course, those words would turn out to be rather vain, even look foolish in time. Let's explore why. Imagine a time travel scene in which somehow Charles Babbage is transported, perhaps along with the admirable Ada Lovelace, 100 years in time, to meet fellow-Briton Alan Turing. Turing, with great flourish, shows off his computational devices along with some of his academic writing, such as what we now know as the Turing machine, the concept of the universal computer, and his work on the Entscheidungs problem. To impress upon Babbage, in the knowledge that Babbage was his predecessor, or perhaps just pioneer, in the conceptualization of computational devices and their implementation. Corrigendum erroris intentionis, attempted implementation. For Babbage's device, the difference engine, never saw the light of the day as an all-singing, all-dancing, actually, all-reading, all-reckoning invention. Babbage would no doubt be crestfallen, perhaps only to be consoled by the astute and empathetic Countess Lovelace. Some historians might have, at least in the late Victorian period, written off Babbage as a failure, as a hopeless dreamer with no concrete idea, having wasted the British government's funding largesse in some vain project that had no merit in it. They would be wrong. It wasn't Babbage with whom the fault of the failure of his endeavors lies. The problem is that Babbage was born in the wrong age. In fact, he was a century ahead of his time. My point is this: Charles Babbage, to my mind a genius, was trying to build an informatic device in a mechanistic way. He was trying to do what we call information technology, but in the industrial age. So despite Lovelace having written what can be seen as the very first computer programs, such as the algorithm for calculating Bernoulli's numbers intended for the analytical engine, Babbage couldn't succeed in building a functional computer that could execute her programs. So going back to our vainglorious surveyor of the achievements of the industrial age and his brash pronouncement, we can see in greater clarity why he was wrong, both in the substance but also in the spirit of his claim. Of course, we know from our chronological vantage point that such a claim is wrong, even outrageous, but it is interesting, if not instructive, to lay this out as explicitly as I am doing here. If nothing, because the epistemic transition from thinking about technology as mechanistic to informatic, or what we might more commonly call digital, was not straightforward, and from hindsight, we can see that this took decades to pan out. Between Babbage and Turing, a whole century. I have previously written 2 series of articles, which eventually lead up to a discussion on how the information age developed within the context of current technological trends. Visit my Substack to find them. So, much of the rest of this article is going to be a hybrid summarization and excerption from this earlier body of my work, where I not only trace the transition from the physical to digital I just touched upon, but bring things up to date to the current era we are in, the AI age, if you will. How software ate the world. Quote, software has zero marginal cost. There are high fixed costs, the equipment, application development, etc. But then there's near zero distribution costs. It costs practically nothing to distribute another copy of the same version of software. By contrast, there is a real cost of manufacturing another physical widget of the exact same specification. Correspondingly, thanks to perfect replicability of software, there is no quality loss in copies. Additional copies of a software application distributed to users are identical, bit for bit, with one another. Unquote. A key differentiator of the two ages is this: software, or more broadly, information, lives in a very different realm and is not subject to many of the costs and constraints of the physical world. Babbage's mechanical components constituting his computing device were simply not efficient and effective enough as compared to the electronic components such as vacuum tubes and transistors that ultimately made Babbage's dream a reality, but only a century later. Quote, data is an economic asset. Data is everything. It is the new oil. Data is non-rival, can be utilized by different parties at the same time. Unquote. The information age, for these reasons, is quite different from the industrial age that came before, and tracing this trajectory also helps us look beyond, as we soon will. A nimbler and subtler age. Such characteristics make for more rapid technological progress in the information age, not to mention how much smaller machines can get compared to in the industrial age. Quote, a key player in the technological leap is the transistor, the very device that makes manipulation of electric signals and circuit boards and microprocessors possible. In the 1950s and 1960s, computers were massive machines, using vacuum tubes, a bulky predecessor to transistors, taking up all the space in a large room. Following the invention of the transistor, the integrated circuit, a chip as we also call it, was an innovation to integrate all these interconnected electronic components, transistors, along with capacitors, resistors, and such like, on a single device, typically made of silicon. Advancements in how the IC was fabricated meant that over time it was possible to include more and more transistors into a single chip, leading to them becoming smaller and smaller. This led Gordon Moore, co-founder and later CEO of Intel, to claim that the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. This prediction, which we call Moore's Law, has largely stood the test of time. Unquote. While the achievements of the industrial age were huge, the machines were also huge. At that time, in line with our pompous proclaimer's thought process, most people would have believed that bigger was better. Miniaturization, as we'd call it, became feasible and fashionable only more than 100 years later. But it was not just about size. It was also about speed. Quote, the inventor and futurist Ray Kurzweil, in his own proposed law of accelerating returns, states that the best achieved price performance in computations per second per constant 2023 dollar has improved from 0.001 in 1950 to, in 2023, 100,000 billion, 100 trillion, an increase of 10 to the power of 16%, 10 quadrillion %. Unquote. So yes, in the information age, smaller is not only better, but can also be much faster, much faster. Digitization and dematerialization. This trend towards utilizing an informatic digital means of accomplishing a task which was in the industrial age carried out mechanistically or even manually, has further been extended into more and more areas of human activity, what we may call digitization. Quote, originally, a computer referred to a woman in a team who carried out computation calculations on a large sheet of paper spread across a table or the room, the physical spreadsheet, or switched wires, an early physical way of coding programming on bulky devices, unquote. So yes, even the very definition of the very word we associate with digital activity has undergone, well, digitization. There are other examples of digitization across time: abacus, digital, calculator pigeon, or the guy who ran all the way for miles after the Battle of Marathon to convey the news of victory. Email, flattened dead tree, your iPad, or a digital tablet, not without a smudge of cuneiformic irony. Okay, I confess, these go back to pre-industrial times, but they still serve to illustrate the progression I'm discussing here. The second part of this story is dematerialization. Quote, as per studies carried out by digital economist Andrew McAfee, free market capitalism and technological progress, the prevalent economic system in industrialized nations, are leading to this ecologically beneficial phenomenon. And already in advanced countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom, raw material consumption in many industries and in the economy as a whole has already peaked over the last decade and is now decreasing for the same or increased output and productivity, unquote. This is a topic I've already promised to return to in the other series touching upon AI and economics, but the gist of it here is that digitization is driving a reduction in the consumption of materials, sharply reversing the trend set by the Industrial Revolution. The 5 E's, which then naturally leads us to another big question of our times: energy consumption. I will come back to the specifics of this as part of this promise, but again, the gist here is that decreased use of materials combined with increased use of innovative and more intelligent production practices will lead to a decrease in the consumption of energy, and therefore the strain on the planet this has entailed since the industrial period. And yes, that great enabler of greater intelligence is artificial intelligence, the topic of the other series referenced all through here, and indeed potentially the final stage of our technocentric journey in this series. But here's a glimpse of the kind of improvements AI could bring about. Quote, some of the latest generative AI models have been compared to a mid-level professional in any field: engineering, medicine, law, by way of capabilities and productivity. Let's take a cursory glance at what's involved by way of human resource investment of such a professional. Years of education and training from childhood to graduation. Corresponding physical infrastructure, schools, universities, offices. Transportation and commuting. Daily sustenance and support systems, including work benefits, etc., unquote. When it comes to day-to-day productivity, these models have been shown to be capable of the same productivity as a few days or weeks of such human effort, in hours or even minutes. While there has been a lot said in the press lately of the huge cost of AI, with reference to the electricity and water consumption in the large data centers needed to run these latest AI models, such claims don't take into context the corresponding productivity improvements this is bringing about, as hinted above, and will be explored in specific depth and detail as part of the discussion on the economics of AI. The E's mentioned in the heading of this section have been the subject of the last quoted article: energy, efficiency, economy, and ecology/environment. But it didn't end there. There is, quote, another dimension to this, perhaps another E. Ethical. AI is a democratizing force by decreasing the cost of intelligence, as Andrew Ng has eloquently pointed out. We will make the fruits of intelligence, such as advanced medical treatment, ambitious scientific research, recourse to law and justice, accessible to one and all across the globe in countries rich and poor. And that itself is worth the costs of running a data center? Unquote. The free market of the Creative Commons. Let's take a closer look at this other point, democratization, across our current span of technological discussion. It was much harder in the industrial age to embark on large-scale experiments, and especially large-scale industrial deployments, owing to the sheer cost of the scale of materials needed. In the information age, and specifically in the realm of software, which is what powers this age, there has been a growth in the phenomenon of open source. I have discussed this in detail in the referenced article, and there's a lot more to in that series. But again, let's look at the highlights. Software code, or indeed any digital asset created by individuals, distributed under an open source license, forms part of what I broadly call the Creative Commons, quote, analogous to the town square which is shared by all citizens. And since this is fundamentally about the freedom to engage freely within the legal framework of such open source licenses, I'm also calling it a free market. The greatest example of an open source project is Linux. The work put into which, over the years, exceeds the GDP of some small countries. Linux is what Google copied and modified to become Android, the basis of most non-Apple mobile phones out there. Perhaps you have one in your pocket. Another great example within the Creative Commons context is Wikipedia, where anyone can edit any page, unquote. So, at the apex of the software era, say at the height of the dot-com hype madness at the turn of the millennium, you could imagine similar pronouncements as the one we started this article with, but by someone from a new generation of tech bros that, while worded rather differently, perhaps more subtly, still recycled the same arrogant claim that we had. In effect, just reached the peak of civilization, or at least the peak of technological progress. We have moved from mechanizing the might of the muscle to mining the metal of the mind. But the information age, as with every other, does but make way for another technological era. And as we speak, we stand on the cusp of exactly such a transformation, another one hugely radical and consequential. So we move with it as we continue to explore, study, and analyze every such development in this technocentric journey. So buckle up.
Hey there! Thanks for listening. The following is the list of articles previously written by Ash, referenced and quoted from in this article. Econ 06, How Software Ate the World. Econ 07, The Hardware Revolution Behind AI. Econ 08, Digitization and Dematerialization. Econ 09, AI, Energy and Economic Efficiency. Econ 10, The Free Market of the Creative Commons. Go to Ash's Substack to read the full articles, or browse the podcast list here to listen to them. Thanks again.